All right, second graders, here we go with chapter 2, part 2, in Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle's Magic. We are with some kids who are hearing things differently or they're being silly, so we're going to figure this out. Goodness no, said Mrs. Burbank. They've never had anything. They're the healthiest children in the neighborhood. What's the matter? Mr. Burbank said, Plenty. They can't, any of them, hear well. I told them to look at the fog rise, and they thought I was talking about dog's eyes. Marilyn's mother said she fell off a coaster and hurt her head, and they thought she said Marilyn fell in the toaster and was burnt up dead. Mrs. Burbank finished for him. Bernard, did you ever hear of anyone falling in a toaster? Of course not. There's nothing wrong with our children's ears. It is just that they are going through this awful thought what you said phase. Well, let's get them out of it, said Mr. Burbank. They sound silly. Dog's eyes, indeed. Mrs. Burbank said, Don't worry, dear, I'll take care of it. As soon as she finished talking to Mr. Burbank, Mrs. Burbank called Marilyn's mother to find out about Marilyn, if she was badly hurt, and if there was anything she could do. Marilyn's mother said Marilyn was just fine, but the doctor thought she should be quiet for a day or two. When Mrs. Burbank asked Marilyn's mother if she had ever had any trouble with the thought you said, and about the sugar bowl, and the cinnamon rolls, and the arithmetic book in the stable, and the stall, and Marilyn's fall in the toaster, and the dog's eyes, Marilyn's mother said, Oh, Mrs. Burbank, I'm so glad you told me this. You see, Marilyn has been doing the same thing all morning, and I was terribly afraid that the blow to her head had affected her mind. When I asked her if she wanted crumpets or toast, she said, Bumped on the nose? Who? When I asked her if she had head pained her, she said, I thought you said, Is the bed painted yet? Mrs. Burbank said, I'm going to call up Mrs. Teagle to see if Terry or Teresa are thought-you-setters. She is such good-mannered. She is such good-mannered that if they had thought-you-settitis, she's probably thought of the cure. Marilyn's mother asked Mrs. Burbank to call her back if she got any useful information, and they said goodbye. Then Mrs. Burbank called up Mrs. Teagle. She told her about all the thought-you-settitis and asked if she had any similar experience with Terry or Teresa. Mrs. Teagle said, Oh, no, Mrs. Burbank, you see, we always study correct speech, and we all speak correctly. These children always pronounce their vowels and all their consonants, and therefore we never have any trouble understanding each other. Perhaps the troubles lie with you, Mrs. Burbank. Perhaps you do not speak discreetly. Perhaps the poor little children cannot understand you. I am holding little speech classes every afternoon, and if you and Mr. Burbank are interested, I would be glad to have you attend. And I wouldn't care to have the children because I am afraid they might corrupt my children's perfect speech. Mrs. Burbank thanked Mrs. Teagle for her kind offer and told her that perhaps she was right, that she and Mr. Burbank would try to speak more distinctly, and if things didn't improve within the week, they might join the speech classes. Mrs. Teagle said, Glad to be of help any time, Mrs. Burbank, and hung up. That night when Mrs. Burbank came home, she told him, when Mr. Burbank came home, That night when Mr. Burbank came home, she told him about calling Mrs. Teagle and told him that she thought that from now on they should both try to speak more carefully so that their poor little children could understand. That night at dinner, Mr. Burbank announced in a very loud voice, Please pass the butter! The children all exchanged glances and whispers and laughs. The butter remained cool, and comfortable in its little plate in front of Darcy. Mr. Burbank looked accusingly at Mrs. Burbank. She said in a high, unnatural voice, "Children, listen to me. Please pass your father the butter." "Oh," said Darcy. "Did you say pass the butter? I thought you said fleas, gasp, and mutter." Allison said, "I thought you said he's Pa's mother." Bard said, "I thought you said freeze Pat's brother." Mr. Burbank said in a low, grin voice, "I said, please pass the butter." Darcy passed it to him with a beaming smile. The next morning after breakfast, Mr. Burbank called from upstairs, "Where's my briefcase? Anybody see my briefcase?" Allison said, "Who's got a thief face?" Darcy said, "Beef paste? What do you want with that for?" Bard said, "Leaf race? I thought he said leaf race." They all laughed loudly and did not look for the briefcase. They could hear their mother and father banging doors and scuffing around upstairs, but they were busy with the thought use settings. They didn't even notice that Bard was standing in front of the briefcase, which was leaning against the radiator in the front hall. Finally, Mr. Burbank came running downstairs, wide-eyed and almost too late for the bus. He called to Mrs. Burbank, "If you find it, dear, please bring it down to the office. I must have it this morning." He slammed the front door and ran like wind to the bus. Mrs. Burbank was giving the children their final inspection before school when she saw the briefcase leaning against the wall behind Bard's fat little legs. She said, "Why, children, why didn't you tell Daddy his briefcase was down there? You must have seen it. Now I'll have to make a special trip all the way down to take it to him. Why didn't you tell him?" She looked sternly at her three children. Allison said, "Briefcase? I didn't know that's what he wanted. I thought he said thief's face." Darcy said, "I didn't know that he wanted his briefcase. I thought he said beef paste." Bard said, "I thought he said leaf race." Mrs. Burbank said, "You know perfectly well that Daddy wouldn't talk about a thief's face, beef paste, or leaf races. That's just nonsense, and I'm getting good and tired of all this thought you said business." She sent them off to school with a little push and without a kiss. All right, so, these kids are getting on their nerves. So what do you think's going to happen? Make a prediction, and I'll see you next time.